the stars be with you. All right, I am so happy to welcome back to the podcast, Aquila. Thank you for joining me again.
Hi, Melissa. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Yes, and we had convened before. What was it? Last August. We were talking on some Scorpio business, but that was also when Mars was retrograde at that time, and maybe even Mercury back then. I can't remember, but the retrograde soup is just all a blur in my mind now. But so we connected again, and I asked her, what is it? What do you like to talk about? What's fascinating you? And so she was like, well, I'm into some retrogrades in general and in the natal chart. And so we're going to be talking about that today. But before we get started here, Aquila, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Melissa. Well, I've been studying astrology for the past, I would say 20 years now. I've been practicing astrology as well. I definitely love planetary retrogrades, whether it's natally, whether it's through transit, or whether it's progression. It's something that I have a really big interest in because I have post-planetary retrograde energy in my chart. So I know from firsthand how to navigate and deal with that energy after watching my cycles and rhythms and then dealing with other clients. So it's interesting for me because I know that retrogrades affect a lot of people's either mental state, physical state, or social state, dealing with their surrounding and their atmosphere. So I'd really just like to get into the retrograde and see how other people navigate their retrogradation, and if they even know they have that kind of energy that is present in their force field. Because a lot of people think they're slow or they think they can't catch up, when it's really just your energy is not really meant to go in that direction. It's supposed to be doing something else.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about it as well, because we don't, we're usually talking about transits and what's going on in the sky, and that's very important, but there's a lot to be said with retrogrades within the natal chart. And a lot of people, I'll sit down with people who've never had their chart read, and sometimes with people who have, and I'll be like, oh, do you know you have Mercury? You were born when Mercury is retrograde, or Venus. And they're like, what? Really? And it is a key piece to the chart on many levels, especially those personal planets. So I can't wait to pick your brain on just the nature of retrogrades here. And so do you have a lot of retrogrades in your own chart, or what sparked your personal interest of like, this fascinates me?
Well, what sparked my interest with the retrograde really has to do with the family, actually. My mother is not a person that likes to talk too much about things, so I had to use astrology to kind of go backwards in time to see what was happening around my birth. So I started with looking at the year, a year before I was born and a year after I was born, because I wanted to see what planetary energy what was happening in the sky, not just when I was born, but right before I was born, and then also after, to see how it affected just in overall my energy field. So because I always found I have a Mars in Aries, and I have my Moon in Aries, and it's very Martian, but I always find, and I also have a Venus in Libra, so that's real, like
yes.
That's like really balanced. Yeah, but I always found that I was more I would be Aryan with a lot of things, but then I would find I'm very Libra-ish with a lot of other things. So I was like, okay, what is going on with my Mars? Like, something's not functioning right, because I know a lot of people with Mars in Aries direct, and they're very like going like 1,000 miles an hour, if I can say. Sometimes not even looking to see what's happening around them, but I find I'm always very observant with my surroundings. So then when I looked at the chart, I realized that I was born with a Mars post retrograde. So my Mars never really reached the where it was right before the retrogradation started. So I always found that I always had to keep going backwards physically, my physical energy, to do something, or to, and I was like, what's up with that? So when I really looked at it, I started looking at all my personal planets. And I have Venus in Libra, and I was trying to find out what was going on in the year that I was born. Both Venus and Libra retrograde, both Venus and Mars retrograded. So I knew that there was there was a click there because I'm very androgynous. So I'm very like feminine and masculine energy. I love to weigh the two energies together. And it made so much sense when I realized that Mars and Venus were retrograding literally right before my birth. Like Venus was a couple months before, and Mars was literally like a couple days after my birth. A couple days before my birth, it went direct. So I found that intriguing, and I started really looking at my life and applying it to other transits. I was like, whoa, okay, Eureka, you got it.
Yeah. Oh, that I love that point, Aquila, because with Mars having station direct right before you were born, like if you just look at the chart, you're not going to see any type of evidence of retrograde Mars, right?
No.
But really, yeah, that's when we have to get in there and start looking at, like you were going back and, you know, looking at maybe the ephemeris and seeing the transits that happened before then. But also when you look at planetary speed, you'll be able to see, you know, how fast that planet was operating at the time you were born. And, you know, I have kind of a similar story, but on the other end of it, where I have Mercury really slow in my chart because Mercury was slowing down to station retrograde less than a week after my birth. So, yeah, so even though I don't have Mercury retrograde in the chart per se, I have a very slow Mercury that in essence still kind of operates with that retrograde flavor because, you know, it's just in a slower state. Through progressions, it retrogrades, which we'll get into in a little bit here. But
yes, that's another thing.
Yeah, that is another thing. So don't you be fooled out there if you're like, I don't have Mercury retrograde or I don't have, you know, chances are it's pretty common to, at some point in your life, especially if you live a long one, to have Mercury retrograde through your chart at some time.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting with Mercury retrograde people to be, I love Mercury retrograde individuals, to be very honest. I have my Mercury conjunct Pluto and Scorpio. So I'm very I like to keen in, zone into a lot of things. And I notice that people with Mercury retrograde tend to have the same kind of energy because they're not just looking for facts, they're looking for everything. They're listening to the way the person said the word. They're watching the vibrations of the body. They're listening to the mental also like chatter that's around them to see if they would like their mental, like their mind to be engaged in something like that. I also find with Mercury retrograde natives that they take in a lot of information on a particular subject or many subject, depending on the sign, element, and aspects that were being made to that Mercury as well. Especially if Uranus has been aspecting that Mercury, or forget it, the person's gonna probably have their introverted mental energy in a lot of different things. But I do find with people with Mercury retrograde, as they get older, they tend to function, I find, way better than people with Mercury direct because they're able to see things, or let me say this, they're able to pick up things with their antenna that other people cannot pick up. You tell me what you think about that, Melissa. Is that your experience?
Well, I mean, for me personally, yeah, it's so funny that you say the antenna because, and you're actually bringing up a memory that I haven't thought about in a long time, especially when I think about Mercury actually slowing down to retrograde in my progress chart. And this might be getting advanced because we haven't gotten there yet. But around that time, I was about, 7, 8 years old. And it was very common for me in that period of my life where I would play a game with myself, where I would listen to the radio and I would listen with my antenna to what would come next before it would come next. And I would be astonishingly correct with just sensing what the next song was going to be that would come on. And so that's interesting because Mercury was stationing at that point in my life, and that was a fun game I'd like to play with myself. But I agree with you because there is, like, if we think about retrograde planets in general, and we use maybe the term loosely, of course, maybe the retrograde is more of an introverted, subjective experience versus that direct planet, which can be more extroverted or, objective and out there. And so if we're looking at the mind and its subjectivity and its ability to like really go in there and like almost like your Mercury Pluto conjunction, you know, like get intense analytics and being able to kind of reason everything out and pick apart everything, you know, for better or worse though, because that can be exhausting over time. And maybe that's where the Mercury retrograde individual at some point realizes like, this is maybe too much, you know, because it's like almost like a blessing and a curse depending on how you get to use it, you know. And maybe that's where it comes in when you're saying in when they get older they realize the strength of that.
Yeah,
so
for sure. I also find with Mercury retrograde, situations with friendships, siblings, environment, cars, anything that has to do with third house kind of energy, that becomes more prominent. Also communicating, connecting, meeting, greeting, all that kind of, even languages, different languages, or just learning how to greetings in different languages. That's something a Mercury retrograde person I find is very interested in. Or the relationship with the family is very interesting with a Mercury retrograde individual. Or situations with paperwork is very interesting with Mercury retrograde, meaning like they're always either forgetting something or on the ball with everything that has to do with paperwork because of the function of Mercury when it goes retrograde. You said something about your progressed Mercury also is now because it was your Mercury stationary retrograding your chart, but you said you can't see it with the naked eye. You have to go back into the ephemeris.
yes,
And I find that there was something that was probably happening that you needed to, for your energy, needed to go back and reassess before it even like can move on to that next degree or that next phase. I also like to look at, when you talked about speed, I like to look at degrees also. Degrees are very important for me in a birth chart. I can literally map out someone through degrees only. I don't even need to see the aspects sometimes. The degrees tell me what was the function, the degrees before the retrograde, the degree during the retrograde, and the degrees post-retrograde when they all add them up. I look at I'm asking myself, what was this energy trying to do? And what did it have to go back for? And I look at the person's chart like the same thing. What is this person trying to do? And what do they always need to go back for when they're doing something regarding that Mercury or of that planet in that house specifically? And sometimes if people are more symbolistic and they're not really numerical, I use astrology. I use tarot cards to break down the degree points for them, whether it's in water, air, fire, or earth. So I use the different elements as well so they can see that degree, rounding it down to the numerology point. So it's very interesting when you put all that together. You tend to see a story, and the person will understand the story by looking at the picture. Using the Rider-Waite deck, though, the Rider-Waite deck. I don't use other decks. I like to keep it real.
Like the symbolism.
Yeah. Because I feel like that deck is Pamela Colin-Smith, the designer. I think she really illustrated everything beautifully enough in that. So I use that deck to also help me with the degrees also.
Oh, I like that. I'm interested in that technique. There's a lot you can tell. There's a lot you can tell by degrees. I mean, I'm a fan of Sabian symbols, and I use those a lot in my work, which is along those lines. There's a fellow astrologer, Christopher Witecki. I don't know if you've heard of him before, but he has this whole. Will eventually write a book on it, but he has a whole system of. He calls it a step system where he just uses degrees himself too. And it's based off of numerology, and chakra. And it's fascinating. And I follow his work and I have for a long time. And so basically what I'm saying is that there is a lot you can tell by a particular degree. And I love that you brought that, talking about what needs to go back to be, you know, perhaps integrated and reviewed. If we're thinking about Mercury retrograde, you know, because Mercury is an intellectual process, you know, it's an understanding, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about my own chart right now, of course, because what all the Leo planets are like, well, let me just relate it back to me. So really it wasn't until my late 20s that Mercury finally went direct in my progressed chart. And to this day, it has not reached its natal position that it started at. So there's a lot to be said for that too, because when we have these progressed movements, there was a nugget of awareness that came in when that stationed direct again for me at the end of my 20s. And there's another one on the way when it makes it back to its natal point, because it's like a full circle, right? And you know what? I've had to go through a lot of my own mental processes in order to even make the choices that I did at the end of my 20s, and to take the path that, you know, was calling to me, because the mind and the emotions together really were operating in a way that wouldn't facilitate me to be able to do what I was doing until I had that period with myself. So I totally agree with what you're saying, and that having to go back in order to, I don't know, integrate or understand or direct it, even
assimilate it, or into your very interesting that you brought up your progressed Mercury going direct, the fact that it is still traveling where Mercury was still retrograding. Where Mercury was retrograding during the time of your birth, because with me it's the same thing, but with my Mars. So we're gonna switch it up a little bit tonight, just to give people like a different perspective of how this energy works. My Mars got to its natal position, actually. It passed it already, but it got to its natal position. And before then, I was picking partners that were being dictated by my family. Martian energy, either male, masculine energy, or something like that. When Mars got to its station, like its actual point of finishing the post shadow, you know, where it was and everything changed for me regarding relationships with masculine energy, myself and my physical energy, how I express my also willpower, and my creative work, because I have Mars in a fire element, and we know that's very confident. My confidence began to like exude more. I felt more powerful once it reached that point. And now it's crazy because the Mars is now in another zone in the chart, but it's still in the same sign. But now this Mars is learning so much different things. But what it's doing, what I've noticed with myself, it's incorporating all that backwards energy, all that forward energy, and then using that to also assimilate every masculine willpower energy that's coming at it. And I also find that my taste in a lot of my movements, where I wanted to go, changed. You know, before it was I would probably go to this place or that place because a friend or something. Now it's usually more self-oriented. It's more directed at myself. I have zero patience for people anymore, you know. But my Mars post retrograde showed me how to be patient with people, but also the type of people to use my patience with, and the ones to not use my patience with, because the Martian energy was being used in other people's world, because I didn't know how to navigate my Mars energy before all that retrograde energy posted and stopped right there. So that was very interesting. You talk about your Mercury with that. And I also find with my Mars retrograde, I attract certain type of men. I was attracting certain type of men in my life before it reached its pinnacle of that retrograde point. And after that, I started attracting men that just loved that, you know, that fire in me more so. When before, they more so like the calm, okay, let's do this because it's nice and it's pretty. And now, you know, it's a different type of fire that's coming from my energetic field. But I understand it, so I get it a lot. You know what I mean? So this helps people also understand it doesn't really matter. It's your unique journey, your retrograded planet's unique journey to figuring out yourself. Sometimes I feel, and I feel sometimes you're better off having retrograde planets because you get a better self-awareness of yourself. I find people that don't have that much retrogradations in their chart, they're too depending if Saturn is aspecting things, that's a whole nother ballgame. Saturn has. But with Saturn aspecting something, it may slow down that, you know, limit that planet a little bit to do what it wants to do. But when you have a retrograde planet and Saturn is even aspecting that, you're definitely going to learn either how to do something from adult authority or people around you that are older, or maybe they may teach you the wrong way or the right way to navigate that energy. And when your planet goes direct by progression, if it ever does, you get to initiate the way you want to use that energy. To me, from what I've seen in my astrological also consultations with my other clients. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And I love your story about Mars and how that changed with what you attracted. And
For sure.
And why I find that interesting is because we have to remember, first off, number one, with retrogrades, the only reason we experience retrogrades is because we are on Earth. No planet is ever retrograding. No one's ever going backwards, and that's never happening, right? But it's our geocentric view that is what gives us the retrogrades to begin with. So actually, the sun itself is very much tied in with the nature of retrogrades and how we, consciously integrate them, because the sun is a key factor in us even deeming a planet retrograde. Now, to play that into what you were saying about Mars, and I love this connection, because basically any superior planet that is past the Earth, Mars to Pluto, when it's retrograde, it is essentially opposite the sun. That's the cycle. It's creating an opposition. And so with an opposition, a lot of times we get reflections, right? Or we get conflict because there's something that is outside of us. And so I love how you had this one more almost like Libra-ish type of energy that you were attracting when that was still going on, because there was almost like a projection of that going out and you were getting that back. But then when you found that fire and you reconnected with that within yourself, then that same style projection was bringing you back people that really dug that and was like, yeah, I love your passion and so that makes a lot of sense within just that relationship and that potential for projection, especially with the superior planets. So I think
for sure. Yeah, for sure. It definitely helped me understand other people's movements, my movements, and movements in general. Because I think my Mars being stationary,
Mercury in Pisces retrograde.
Mercury.
I know.
Post retrograde, I also realized, because I always assessed my my masculine attraction. Why am I attracting these people? I mean, I'm very self analytical. Remember, Mercury's conjunct Pluto. This is why I feel people with Mercury retrograde is always self-analyzing. And I've watched this with clients. I am also a teacher, so I work with children. And sometimes a child has a different style of learning. And it literally takes one person to kind of realize it and realize, okay, this child needs this kind of learning. They need this kind of learning, or, kind of putting in the multiple intelligence type of thing in the field of astrology as well, because not everybody is going to have the same way of experiencing their Mercury retrograde, because some may have it in fire, earth, water, air, and that's like that energy that's pent up a little bit, and they really need to find a way to express it in their force field, in their energy field. So when that Mercury or that Mars or that Venus or whatever personal planets are retrograding, there's a personal need from my perspective, to find a way to integrate this energy, but find a way to integrate it that it works for you. It doesn't need to work for other people, but it needs to work for you, because that energy, if it doesn't work for you, somebody else will make that energy work for it. That's how I've also noticed about retrograde energy. Because you're projecting a lot, that energy is coming back at you. It's like you said, a seesaw type of energy. So it comes to you in the form of people, experiences, challenges. Also, a big thing with challenges. I've noticed this a lot. People with retrograde personal planets tell me they're personally always feeling like they're facing challenges in their day-to-day, whereas the generational planets, it's more so like, what's happening around them. And things that are really out of their control. That's different. That's a little bit different. But the personal planets, that's ours to harness. That's ours to use that field of energy and feel like, okay, I'm balancing this, I'm doing that, I'm able to work this out, and I'm using my force field for it. As opposed to outer planets, you're using the energy of your generation, you're using the energy of the world around you, your atmosphere, whatever it is. Those tend to be the things that play a really big key part in that retrogradation phase, from the personal to the outer. Because I know you told me that Mercury is the only planet that you have retrograde in your chart?
Well, and it's not technically retrograde, but it is slow, like like
Oh,
that
I mean,
Mars for you. But no, I have Uranus and Neptune. Those are the only that's what I have
okay.
stationary. But to play off of what, not stationary, but retrograde. But to play off of what you're saying with education, because I think that's a very important fact, and especially when we're looking at
Mm-hmm.
Mercury retrograde, because people learn different.
Mm-hmm.
They do, and we can't be in this
Yes.
homogenized system, spitting people out in only one way of doing it. And for an example, I had a friend who has Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, and she's a Virgo rising, so that's going to make that Mercury very important for her. Now, when she said that
Mm-hmm.
when she was young, she had some learning difficulties. She just had, it was just different and harder for her to keep up or to just integrate, the knowledge the way that they were sharing it. However, she entered at the same age, she entered a contest where everyone had to write a poem about, more of an artistic and creative process. She won the damn thing, so even though she had these learning difficulties and within relation to how the school was set up, when she was given that creative outlet, because I've noticed Mercury retrograde, because it's such an internalized process and does things quite differently,
Mm-hmm.
it gets a very creative process. And you'll see a lot of artists and
Mm-hmm.
musicians that have this placement. But she was able, despite being labeled as someone with learning difficulties, to win a writing challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's also interesting about her is that she gets motion sickness in cars, and she always has to have the front seat. She can't be in the
Okay.
back because, so when you were talking about cars and Mercury retrograde, that made me laugh.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, you have to look at the details when you're looking at an astrology chart. You know that. It's really more like the bread and the butter comes from how is this person really using it. From my educational background, experience that I've had with children is when that planetary energy is retrograding, it's looking at the other sign. It's looking at the other sign. It wants to know what the hell is happening with the other sign. It's more so pulling the other sign to it. So your friend having her Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, I find that Aquarius is looking at Leo.
Mm-hmm.
Leo is the artist, and when the one that can express itself a lot more on a free kind of stage, as where Aquarius is more systematic, and it can look at things very scientific. But when it comes to creating things, it's Leo that's really the creator. It's really Leo, the sun, that gives that energy. So I can see where her Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, being a Virgo rising, affected her expression. Her whole expression, her being, and that's with words. Words are her way of expressing herself. But she just had to find an outlet. And that's another thing too. You got retrograde planets. You're watching this video, try different techniques. Try different things. You cannot stick to the same thing, because if you do, you might stay stuck in that function and never really learn how to operate this energy in your life. Sometimes it happens by accident, that somebody tells you something or you bump into something, and this is kind of how you realize this about yourself. But I stress the multiple intelligence thing. Everyone has different ways of learning. The planetary energy, as in Venus, the beauty, the love, the money, the values, now Uranus is in Taurus. All those people that have Venus retrograde in their natal chart, do you know how amazing this transit is going to be for these people? Because Venus retrograde is a very avant-garde Aquarian type of love. So when we look at Uranus right now going with Taurus, which is the first Venetian ruled sign, and it has to do with basically your basic needs, those basic things you need in life. I feel like all these people with their Venus retrograde is about to get a kiss from heaven, the kiss from the sky, because now planetary energy time has come for this energy's power and magnetism to finally be appreciated by the greater world. I'm a person born with Uranus in the second house, so I've been waiting for this transit. You know what I mean? So it's more, yeah.
It's here, girl. It's here.
Yeah, I've been waiting for this Uranus transit, and people really want to talk about it like it's going to be something bad. If you have Uranus aspecting any of your personal planets, this is something you've probably been waiting for too and don't even know it. It's going to open up so much energy for you if you allow that energy in. So retrograde planets can also help outer planet aspected personal planet people. any sense to yeah. So it's more like that. So the retrogression really can help a lot, because you're not thinking the same way. You're not functioning the same way. You're not acting the same way. You're not doing things the way the mainstream is doing this. So outer planets are really that kind of like force that kind of holds that. And when you have personal planets retrograding, you're going to attract a lot of outer planet people into your world, period. Period. You know, for the good or for the bad, it depends on that person's experience in life. But you get to also navigate, okay, why is this weird kind of energy always approaching me? Why is this or that coming my way? It's usually because you're a retrograded individual that needs someone from an outer planet energy to come to you or to find you or whatever, to help you understand that you're okay. It's cool. Everybody learns different. Everybody functions different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes people think they're slow. I have kids that are dyslexic that I work with. They think they're slow. So some of the most creative children that I work with are dyslexic. And they don't have Mercury retrograde, but guess what they do have? Uranus in strong aspect to their Mercury. Neptune in strong aspect to their Mercury. Pluto in strong aspect to their Mercury. Saturn in strong aspect. Strong aspect means any contact. Any contact to me is a strong aspect from the outer planet. So that's how that works to me in the force field of the human. And how do they want to like use this aspect to be very avant-garde in their life and to be okay with it. To be okay with it, depending on where that planetary energy is, and in progression, has it stayed retrograded or is it going direct? A big thing too, I find.
Well, no, that's super interesting with the well, because if we think about Mercury retrograde and just Mercury as a planet, it's all about reasoning and analyzing, you know, looking at logic, more of a scientific type of pull it apart, put all the pieces together type of thing. And so if it's internalized and retrograde there, of course, we're going to get a more creative right brain process because it's just functioning different. So like you said, you know, it's a shame that only us astrologers realize this, you know, in a world where when it's much needed to, you know, see the different ways that people, you know, take in this information, or like those dyslexic students, you know, not just because they're reading things backward, you know, doesn't mean they're not gaining something from it or have this creative process. And I don't know. So I digress, but let's talk about Venus a little bit since we gave Mercury and Mars some love. And I was laughing when you were talking. I forget exactly what you said because my significant other, he has Venus retrograde, and he has and you know what's funny is he has Venus retrograde in Virgo, which is about to be in a trine to Uranus, who just moved in Taurus. And before I go on real quick about that though, to kind of play off of what you're saying about how Uranus and Taurus can help those Venus retrograde individuals, is because no matter where you have Venus retrograde by sign or house, that's important, of course, but it's always going to give the flavor or help dictate the house that is ruled by either Taurus or Libra. And so having Uranus come into Taurus is, you know, significant, like Aquila said, for those Venus retrograde people, because essentially that house is governed by that retrograde Venus. Now, I like what you said earlier too, how you were saying about your own self and having an androgynous, you know, I relate to that as well. And my significant other is so like that, which is hilarious because he actually told me one time, and I'll never forget this because I laughed so hard. He's like, I feel like I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body. And I'm oh, it just cracks me up. And I'm like, okay, I see how that I see that. Okay. Because Venus is, and the whole idea of the retrograde Venus transit and when it meets the sun via the retrograde. And I talked about this with Kelly Surtees back in this October, is that Venus is essentially moving out of its male warrior state to then unify as a whole in that androgynous part as it meets the sun in the inferior conjunction to then go on and be in that feminine receptive state. So that's why Venus does represent those things such as, you know, wholeness and unity and the two parts coming together. And so yeah, and another interesting thing about him too, and having this internalized Venus process, is that he is always having socializing and relating struggles. Because when he is having those challenges, like you had brought up earlier, how there's challenges from the outside, basically to kind of, you know, prompt these inner facilities to go in and look at this. He just has a hard time of like understanding sometimes of what he's encountered from other people, especially if there's pushback or if he's right, if they're right, if you, he can get extreme paranoia because of it too, because he just can't integrate it very well, or the situation. And because that's really less about his objective understanding of what's going on, and it ties into that subjective view that he's encountering and trying to integrate that. So that's pretty interesting to me.
Oh, for sure. I find Venus, when we talk about the masculine, feminine energy, doesn't matter your sexual preference or how you view, you know, all of that in relationships. If you're a man and you have your Venus retrograde, you're not going to be attracted to the same things that every guy around you is. I mean, everyone's attracted to something different, but a Venus retrograde male, whether he's straight, gay, transgender, or just, you know, doesn't want to be labeled as anything, your attraction to anything is going to be very avant-garde. It's going to be different. It's not going to be the norm, and they have to just be okay with that. Just like women that have their Mars retrograde, your attraction to men are not going to be the same way. You're not going to be attracted to some like muscular, maybe physically, but that male dominating energy that likes to control and consume. That's usually not what a Mars retrograde female is attracted to. She needs a man that can pull that energy in and use it maybe to facilitate other things in his world and allow her to be her. Just like a Venus retrograde man needs to just facilitate the fact that I don't like what every guy likes, and I'm okay with that. Or my lady or my man or whoever, my partner, is gonna have something about them that is odd and different and beautiful, but to me, and I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? Because I think it also, when you look at the personal planets retrogradation, it also helps you understand your relationships to everyone around you, really, and why is it that you're more attracted to certain individuals and not others. It's a big deal. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit on the Martian energy. Before my Mars got stationed at the point that it went retrograde, I was attracting a lot of men that were very similar to my father, the sun.
Oh, okay.
The sun. Talk about the planetary energy and stuff like that. And after it got to the point where it was done, completely different. I'm telling you, completely different energy came. I also want to touch on the subject of people that don't have planetary retrogrades in their natal chart, but when you look at their progress chart, there's some retrogradation going on.
Yep.
I had a client of mine that he's a male, and he had no retrograde planets in his birth chart. But something told me, check out the progress chart and see what's going on before we do this session. And I look at the progress chart and I see Mars is retrograde and Saturn is retrograding. I'm like, all of a sudden, this masculine energy, this physical energy turns inward. So immediately something told me, and I was looking at the degrees and the point that this planets were, and I was using my handy dandy tarot cards to help me understand the understanding of the degree points as well. When I had this session with the client, he was straight, had a daughter, and he was transitioning into his attraction for men, being comfortable with that. Didn't know how to deal with the fact that he was attracted to men, but had already had encounters with men and was very attracted to androgynous looking type of woman. very masculine, you know, when we talk about the basic, like, oh, I'm masculine, whatever that means for people, but he was very attracted to that. And he even told me he felt more comfortable talking to me as a woman because my hair was shaved and it was cut short. So it gave him this comfort level, even though I had a vagina. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I found that very interesting. I always noted things like that when I did readings with people that had no retrogrades, and then all of a sudden there's a retrograde. I also had a female that had her Mercury and her Venus direct, and then she's like in her 60s now. The planets have turned retrograde. So I literally asked her during the session, how much love have you been given out? You know, how much have you been given out? Because right now it doesn't seem like it's time for you to give all that energy to other people anymore. It's time for you to give it to you. She bawled crying. She couldn't understand. She was like, oh my gosh. And pinpointing the time that the retrogradations happen is very important too. Going back into the ephemeris, checking those things out. But it does help a lot of people with understanding why is this happening to me? Why has this changed in my life drastically or dramatically? So that's really interesting for me as an astrologer to also assist and help them understand it's okay. This is your evolving energy field is asking for this.
Yeah.
And the more that you try to fight it, the worse things are going to come to you. Like the more it's going to be more difficult for you to integrate all this energy and live more peacefully, you know, more peaceful state of mind, I would say.
Yeah. I love that story. That's fascinating to me. And it speaks to so much how, you know, we are, like you said, there's this involving force, and that's where the progressions really come in. And, you know, you can look at the natal chart all day, and there is a lot to be said there because that is essentially the promise. But all, you know, all those shifts that we then encounter, sure, there's transits that are involved in that, but essentially those slow moving planets are the slow moving changes in the progressions. And that's why it's so stark when we do have these, either a planet goes retrograde or it turns the other way and goes direct, because in the progress chart, it just takes so long for this to happen. And even the station itself can be a couple of years basically where this energy is changing, like that man that you were talking about. He's like, wait, now I have this attraction to this more masculine, you know, like this wasn't necessarily in me before or was latent, and now I have to integrate it and understand it. And you're really not even going to get that information until you look at the progressions. And that's one of the reasons why progressions are so important. I mean, they're like a key to really getting into any chart. So
I never do a natal chart reading for a client without checking progressions.
Yeah.
I never do a reading client without it's like second nature to me now. I'm looking at your birth chart. I'm looking at your progress chart. I want to know what's going on with you internally and externally. So when you talk to me, you're feeling like, okay, I'm not tripping. You understand what I'm going through? Yes, I do. Like, it's okay. You can talk openly with me. I'm not judging. Trust me, I've been in a couple places. But you also want to be able to let your client know that you're not judging them. It's energy, and you're an expression of that energy right now. And what this energy needs from you is for you to either go inward, change the way you're doing things, look back, look at the fine print, look at whatever planet that is that's retrograding. That's the energy that it's asking you to kind of like reanalyze more so. And how you're using it in your world. How are you using energy? You know, Mercury's for friendships as well. So it's a big like indicator. Like, you know, you probably attract very different types of friends coming in, not really like your normal type of friends. And I also find another thing too is retrograde people tend to attract retrograde people. I find that often, actually. Retrograde anything. Like they'll find something that's retrograding and they'll like find a niche to do something with it. But it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when I think about, you know, Venus retrograde, and to go back to my partner, and he like I said, feels like he's a lesbian trapped in a man's body. You know, he does have this more feminine side to him because essentially, you know, it's just there. And I've noticed, to play on what you were saying earlier, is that he is attracted to more aggressive women. And like myself, I'm unusual and aggressive and more assertive, and his Venus is in Virgo. I love to critique him and boss him around, you know? And we work well that way. Like we're a team through that. Like he's very receptive to me in my direction, and that helps him. And it helps him be able to integrate his own like challenges, like I was saying before, with his relating to other people. Because I will aggressively break that down for him. Like I won't let him like stew on it too long. I'll be like, okay, let's get in there and take a look at that. And even his partner before me is an incredibly strong, aggressive woman as well. So there is that turnaround, or maybe even once again back to that projection, right? Like if he's internalizing more of that feminine force, and then where
somebody else is
yes, exactly. So yeah.
But with the retrograde planets also, I would like to also point out we're in a definitely evolutionary state right now, in this time that we're in, where what is normal, what is the status quo is slowly changing with gender roles, same-sex marriages, all of these different things that are now becoming it's a more Aquarian time for people. So I feel like as we slowly shift into that, the retrograde planets will mean something different, maybe in another 100 years for other people, because we're still evolving as human beings here. So a man having Venus retrograde, being attracted to a very strong woman in this society that's slowly changing, that is avant-garde. You know what I mean? That is, what are you doing with this woman? That's all, because women are not really, we're definitely we're very under. Let's just say our value system is not as much as it needs to be right now. Okay. And change, but also I feel like this Uranus and Taurus transit is going to assist with that, because women are taking a lot more responsibility for their own body, their own mind, their own consciousness, everything. So that's changing. So I do feel like when you have that retrograde energy, and the time and space that you're born in does affect you greatly, because I have friends that are from such open families and they have retrograde energy, and they're able to understand to some degree that they're different because their family was different. So they were able to incorporate that into their life. And then I have some people that were born in very traditional families with retrograde energy, and they felt like they were lost at sea, like seriously, didn't know. And then, moving to different locations and moving to different countries, or whatever the case may be, help them feel more at home with their retrograde planets than maybe where they were before. Because Mercury can also mean you probably need to move where you live. You know what I mean? You probably need to move your location, or you don't need to be too close to family where you are, Venus retrograde means maybe the females that you grew up with were a little bit crazy, but something of that nature. Or maybe you didn't value what you had to say. Because to me, Venus has a lot to do with what you're hearing, what you're hearing. Mercury is the processing of that. Venus to me is what they're hearing. What did you hear me say? And Mercury is, what did you process me saying, though? Like, what did you understand from me saying all of this? So I find with Venus retrograde people, they don't believe sometimes what they're hearing. They're like, am I beautiful? Really? You think I'm beautiful? You think I'm smart? And it's just the affirmation, affirming that, yes, you are, especially if it's Venetian, a woman, or even Martian energy being retrograde. You need affirmation. I always needed affirmation from my male partner about a lot of different things. And when my Mars when it hit its pinnacle, I was like, F all that, I'm good. I don't need a man to tell me that. I'm going to tell myself that. So I do think that that's very important too, to look at the fact that the retrograde planets are going to dictate a lot, but it's also like you as well, and understanding. So if I have a Venus retrograde, I may not be hearing everything the way that it's being said to me. So I would probably need to ask someone, can you repeat that? What did you mean by that? Or if someone, says something about your looks or whatever, oh, thank you. What are you interested in? What are your interests? So you can kind of figure out, okay, well, you don't have to put yourself in the box to be valued by others. You can just find out what their value systems are more so. So you can incorporate that and understand that they just have very different value systems than you. So their judgment or their words or whatever, it's not really, it doesn't phase you because you now understand, oh, this is this person's value system. This is my value system. I hear this, they hear that.
Yeah.
So you kind of know how to flow better with another person. Yeah.
That is a fantastic point. And it really speaks to the idea of, because the retrograde is such an internalized process, and the people develop their own inner, principles, essentially. What happens is, through that subjectivity and that internalization, they end up with a lot of expectations, and and then they're just they're not met on the other side, because that's just not. Or like, I love that fact of listening, especially for Venus, because that's a receptive force. That is a taking in, and if you've already conceptualized or have an expectation around that, and in what you thought would be reflected back is in turn not, there is a disconnect there, or it's harder to struggle with that. And so I think expectations are another thing of retrograde planets, especially the inferior ones, to look at and realize that what you expect, for the most part, is not really how it's going to play out.
No.
Yeah.
No. I have outer planet retrograde Jupiter. And the way that I teach my students is very different from the way that every other teacher in my school teaches their students. But I've always, and it's in Gemini. So I definitely, I'm definitely on the ball when it comes to that. And parents are always trying to figure out, how do you know how to talk or teach this child? I'm like, instinct, but it's really just understanding your child learns differently. And the system's not working for it. The brain isn't processing that information the right way. So, but it's also by me going through those same experiences in my life as a child, not learning the same way, having to learn. I speak 3 different languages. So for me, language is big, and trying to understand what someone is saying is big, but I also try to understand the person's philosophy, the way they put these things together that they're hearing, the Geminian energy, like the facts. The facts are great, but what's the ideology behind these facts? I've always been one of those people that watch the news with the side eye, what are they really saying here? That could be my Pluto conjunct Mercury, but in Scorpio on top of it. So I think it's that, but it's also looking at people's words and the way they put their words together. This is what I'm really good at. I've always been really good at understanding deaf students, mute students, students that have speech delays, speech problems, or people that just have some type of communication kind of barrier. And sometimes I'm just I'll ask, is this what you're trying to say? And they'll be like, oh, wow, how'd you know that? And I'm like, I don't know, just figure that maybe that might be it. So it gives them also some type of affirmation or some confirmation that, okay, I am understood by some people, just not all people. So I have to find a way to make sure that the people that understand me are around me, and the ones that don't, well, I give myself some time to understand them. You know what I mean? So it's more so like that. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Oh, the children you work with, they're blessed to work with you, because having that understanding, that is everything. That the way you approach it and just understand this, that they will sense that value down the road for sure.
Yes.
So
this is the big indicator for me that the child, whether they remember how it was done, that they remember someone told them down the line that you don't think the same way. You have to look at things from an angle. You may have to go back sometimes, and that's okay, but you're gonna get it, but it's gonna be your way, not the way everybody else is doing it. So I'm constantly kind of putting that into my students, especially the students with the Venus retrograde, because they have a hard time hearing, understanding what they're being told, or what the teacher is saying to them. So I ask them, what did you hear me say to you? And then they'll regurgitate what they think they heard me say, what they, because Venus, again, 5 senses, the brain, all that. Then we talk about Venus and Libra, and that's communication of the mind. How are we connecting here? What words are you, because let's be real, Libra is like a word porn star. You know what I mean? They love words. You can talk to a Libra about they love it. They connect with you on a mental level. This is what attracts the Libra energy. I have Venus and Libra, so I know. so for me, when the earthy element of Venus ain't working, the logical mental element of Libra's Venus not working, you have a problem here. So you talk about, your relationship now. He's always having this like, what?
Yep.
It's like the dance move where you go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward. Like, I would also say too, I find balancing something very difficult for people with retrograde planets. Balancing is something I've really picked up on over the years with my students and myself. Also, it's really difficult for balancing act. They can balance very odd things, but not things that the world, like the worldly, function. They can't really balance all those things yet, but they can balance something, and you'll be like, wow, how did you get that? How did you understand this? And they're like, it's easy, so their mind just works at a different type of balancing scale. It's like they have to tip, 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 and then they go, ooh, it's like that. That kind of happens, because then when they get this, it's like you get information that kind of like changes your whole function. You're like, and then the balance, and then it goes back to woo.
That's funny because, well, maybe that person that's like, how did you balance that? Or how'd you come to that? Maybe because that is something that they're just incredibly interested in, or that they're drawn to, versus maybe a worldly consideration that we expect people to be in balance with, but they have no interest in that or find it valuable or, to their process. So there is, once again, we're back to that kind of internal versus the worldly or, outside, back to the word expectation of people. And it's so funny when we're talking about listening for especially for the Venus retrograde. I can't even tell you how many times I'm like, you're not listening to me. I'll tell him you're not listening to me. And he is a Gemini rising, so there is a little bit of just that, because Gemini doesn't always listen. Yes. So, but to play that with me being that maybe Venus role in his life as well. And I always feel like, it's not until I'm like, you're not listening to me, that he'll be like, oh no, I'm listening. And sometimes he is. And then sometimes he's totally not.
Yeah. I found something very interesting with the Venus retrograde. I have a friend of mine, they have Venus retrograde in their chart. And it's retrograde in Scorpio. And we were hanging out one day, and I didn't hear the sound of the door. And it was so light. Within like the moment that door, I didn't, but just like, how a dog picks up and it's like somebody's at the door. Like immediately my friend was like, we were talking, I was, somebody's at the door. And I was like, I didn't hear that. And then I stopped, and then the door, and then I really just looked at like, wow, like your ears are so subtle. Your ears you pick up subtle, like the most minute, not hear it. And it was very interesting to watch that, though, to see just how that function of that Venus retrograde is. And they're like this with a lot of things when it comes to like the subtleties of things, and how this is how I heard that. Like, it's very interesting with that. But they hear. It's not that they don't hear. It's just that what they're hearing may be louder or lower than what other people are hearing. How they're like, that small noise became something very, wow. It like, I think it sent like shock waves to the Venetian energy that is retrograding. But the direct planet is listening to everything. Listening to everything around it. So how can it hear these little subtle things that are coming at it? So I find Venus retrograde people to be soft. I don't know. I really enjoy Venus retrograde people, actually, because I have Venus in Libra. So
yeah.
I love their dynamic. I love how they can look at things. My Venus is not retrograde, but it was retrograde the year of my birth. So I watch and follow that, because it retrograded like in my 8th house or something. So I watch people's, I guess I investigate, like, interesting.
Well, and it makes it also, it makes it interesting too, because Venus was retrograde before your birth. So there's essentially, as you were gestating, Venus was retrograding. And I know we don't have a lot to say on that as astrologers. You know, we do have prenatal lunations and the prenatal eclipses, but there is a lot to be said for what was happening while you were forming as well in the womb. And, you know, especially with the parents, you know, because we have our birth chart, right? But essentially those our birth chart was transits happening to our parents, you know, and what they were going through. Yes.
Yeah.
We forget about that. So I don't know.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
My mother told me she didn't eat sugar while she was pregnant with me.
Oh.
I didn't eat any sugar while I was pregnant with you. That was the way she navigated her Venus retrograde situation. And my mom also has her Venus in Libra conjunct Neptune. So she loves sweets. But she told me, when I was pregnant with you, I did not eat sugar. I did not at all. And I was like, I love sugar. I can't get enough of sugar. I've had to like breaks from sugar because of it. But I found it funny how she's a Venus in Libra, and she did not put sugar in her diet while she was pregnant with me. And Venus was retrograding for the I think the 5th month of her pregnancy with me or something like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
well, that's a whole nother can of worms for another day. But it makes you think. You know, it makes you think. That those subtleties can lead to, you know, the mind can open to them. And there's a lot of depth there if we are willing to dive. But there's just so much to look at, you know, overall here. Yeah. So, well, I think we've had a pretty good conversation retrograde-wise. But if you were to say anything with parting words, Aquila, for people with retrograde planets, especially the inferior personal planets, what would you tell these people, just like as a generality? Parting words.
I would tell anyone with retrograde planets, look around you, and if you see everybody doing the same thing, do something different. That's all I gotta say.
That's it. I love it.
Yeah, look around you, look at everything around you or people around you, and if you see that you're just not functioning like them, do it different. Do it different. That's the only way that you're figuring out how to navigate the energy. Again, we're astrologers. We can only tell you when energy is coming, going. It's up to you to decide what you want to do with that energy and how you want to navigate your energy. If you're retrograde Mercury, Venus, Mars, even outer planets retrograde, even outer planets, again, what your generation is doing, you may not be doing it. What your peers are doing it, you may not be doing it. Find something different. Put your interest in other things. With Venus, it's love and money, value systems, your talents, your gifts, and how you're using your body. Are you using your body? Is there other people that's using your body for you? With Mercury, it's your mind. It's the people that you're connecting with. With Mars, it's your willpower. How strong is that willpower? If you find that your willpower isn't that strong, you may attract people that can help you assert yourself in a more Libra-ish way, using words. So maybe that's not your forte, to go at somebody and punch them in the face if you're mad, but you can find words and tools that can help you if you get nervous every time you're in a confrontation with someone. You can find words to die down situations. There's so many techniques. I mean, we can talk about this for days. There's so many techniques. Look around you, do it different. That's all. Look around you and do it different. Try as many different methods as you can. I know it's retrograde, so it may take some time to actually want to get into all of that, but trust me, a transit will happen and it's going to trigger you to do something different. Whether you like it or not, that's just the evolutionary state of all of us. Well, you can't stay still forever. You have to change. You have to progress. You have to evolve. So that's all really, Melissa. You know, the floor is yours now. Thank you so much again for inviting me to your channel and talking about this. I had a blast with you.
Yes. I loved everything you shared, and that last piece of wisdom is right on point. You know, just do it differently. You're meant to do it differently, and that is okay. So, all right. Well, before we get going here, where can people find you, Aquila? What do you got going on?
Oh, great. Wonderful. So you can find me online. I have a YouTube podcast, Aquila Astrology on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram at Aquila Astrology. You can find me on SoundCloud at Aquila Astrology. My website, aquilaastrology.com, will be launched this spring with the new year coming, because with Aries energy, that's my new year. You know, that's how astrologers we navigated. So yeah, that's about it. And if you would like to email me for a personal reading before all of that, you can email me at aquilaastrology@gmail.com. And just wait for me to get back to you. There's a waiting list, but I will get back to anyone that contacts me. I've been doing a lot of work. I appreciate again, Melissa, for you having me on your channel and us discussing these retrograde planets.
Yes. I'm so glad to have you. And, you know, and if you missed some of the things she said or couldn't write them down, you know, I'm going to share that on my blog post as well so that you have access to Aquila. And to get there, you can go to energeticprinciples.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Energetic Principles. And of course, I have my Patreon offering where I have my monthly tarot or weekly tarot subscription and other fun things and early access to the podcast, which you can find on patreon.com/energetic principles. And of course, if you have friends with retrograde planets, spread the word, share the podcast, you know, get it out there what we're sharing here today, because people need to know. And if you like, you know, the podcast in general, leave a good rating on iTunes, because that helps myself and then my guests like Aquila to be seen further. You know, I could go with this spiel forever, but of course I do consultations as well. So if you're into that, please reach out. So thank you once again for joining me, Aquila. I really appreciate having you back, and I hope to have you again in the future.
Next Mercury retrograde. We'll see you again.
There we go. Perfect. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, may the stars be with you.